what server-side OCR is about. So let's start off with the question, what is OCR? Because it's a common term that we throw around, and I always think it's worth defining our terms first. Simply put, it's optical character recognition, or OCR, and it's a digital process which is looking for text within a document. Now, when we use OCR, the industry's standard for OCR is text. We're not talking about handwriting. We're not talking about non-printed characters. Now, OCR itself was actually first developed in the 1970s, and it was originally developed for English text only, and so most of the algorithms were designed around that. However, that's since then changed. Now a lot of other languages are available. The accuracy of OCR, trying to pick up that text, can range anywhere between 81 to 99%, depending on the quality of the image. Now, it's important to point this out because sometimes OCR can appear like a magic wand, because you scan a document and suddenly all of the text of that document becomes searchable, becomes usable, and it becomes a lot more useful. However, we don't want to rely on it too much, because even at its best, it's not 100% accurate. That's not the goal of OCR. The goal of OCR is to get most of the text into the document to make most of it searchable. And so we always want to keep that accuracy in mind. 250 dpi is recommended for optimal results. So that's 250 dots per inch when it comes to the scanning. So that's typically the level of quality that we're looking for within our documents. And that's a balance between accuracy and document size. Really, anything past 300 dpi starts to not get a lot of value from the dpi. We're not getting to be more accurate, and we're starting to really increase the size of the document. Whereas on the other hand, 150 dpi, very low size document, can be very inaccurate for the OCR. So we're always looking for a balance between size of the scan document and what the output is from that scan. There's been many advances in OCR through AI and cloud-based computing for greater accuracy in results, and as well too expanding into some areas such as handwriting. But that really does require an AI engine behind it, and something like a FileHold, which is a standalone enterprise-grade software, we don't have that level of computing within it. Now, we're very proud of our OCR capabilities with the software. We think it's very good, but we want to point out that it's not quite at the level of an AI style, which we can use supercomputing power in order to put onto those documents. We're not going to be dealing with that. And frankly, for the most part, neither are most of our clients who need this. They're dealing with internal office documents that don't require that level of accuracy for the scanning. So FileHold Server-Side OCR is an optional feature. So this doesn't come with the software, but it's easily enabled through our licensing. So if you don't have Server-Side OCR now and you're interested in trying it out, let our team know. You can send us a message always to sales@filehold.com. We can put you in touch with your sales representative or get you some initial pricing so you can figure out how much it would be to add it into your FileHold package. What this server-side OCR will do is it will queue the documents for processing. So it doesn't just apply it to everything at once. It's going to queue the documents that are currently in the repository or newly added documents into a queue for processing. And it's going to automatically look for TIFF or PDF documents that have no text layer, and then it applies that OCR layer to the document. Now, if you're using FileHold, you'll know that FileHold never modifies your original document. So in this process, the document is checked out and then checked back in as a new version with the text layer on top of it. Now, you could be asking, but all we're doing is adding a text layer to the document. It's not important to us. There are optional settings that you can do that will get rid of that original document and just keep the OCR onto it. But we want you to make that choice for your system. Typically speaking, we prefer to just bring it in as a new version. Remember that storage is inexpensive, and we want to make sure your documents are maintained in their original state. And our logic behind that is adding a text layer is a modification. We don't want to do that casually, so we want to make sure that we're checking that document out and back in as a new version in that process. The OCR results are automatically added to the search index through that check-in process. So if we didn't check that document out and back in, we're not sort of exploiting that mechanism that indexes that document and adds the content into the search. And we can see roughly what that looks like. You add a PDF or a TIFF file without a text layer, it's version 1 of the document, OCR runs over top, and then the output is a searchable PDF file with a text layer. And that's another important point there. If you give us a TIFF, which is a standard scanning output, we're going to save that document as a PDF through that process. So again, you can preserve that original TIFF. It becomes version 1, steps to the background. Version 2 now becomes the searchable version of the document. There are some pros and cons to OCR, and we want to be fair about this and give everything its equal weight so that you know what we're talking about when it comes to these features. The first major pro is that it can augment your search results. So you can search in the content of your documents as well as searching the metadata for those documents. It's a much more powerful way to find and locate that information. This does not replace the document's metadata. So sometimes organizations may think, well, we're OCRing these documents, we don't need to apply as aggressive a set of metadata to those documents. I would suggest you likely still need your core metadata for those documents, even with the text searchable. Think in terms of an invoice. It would make sense with an invoice to make sure you're capturing the invoice number, the vendor who it came from, the date of the invoice, and potentially the total as metadata for the document. And that way, when the OCR runs over top of it, it's not misreading a character. I'm going to show you an example of a fairly innocent misreading that can happen and why we still want to make sure that we're tagging our documents with those metadata. Another pro is that it captures info from existing scans. So if you've got a large digital repository already full of scanned documents where no OCR was applied, we can pull that information in when you add those documents into FileHold. So we don't lose the content that's there. You don't have to go back and reprocess those documents. The same amount of effort to add them into FileHold will also put them in with that OCR layer attached to it. The image quality, however, cannot be upgraded, or as they say, garbage in, garbage out. If you scan documents at low quality, then the OCR may not be able to pick up all of the text from it or make them readable. And that's often where we ask the question, what are we archiving here? If we're archiving reports or invoices or temporary documents or things that may not have a lot of value to the organization past their retention period, such as, what is an invoice after 7 years? Is a grainy image of an invoice acceptable? Usually it is, and that's fine. But if you're dealing with, archival documents, and I mean that from like a historic archive, for things that require preservation, OCR may not be the ideal solution for it, and maybe adding a search layer to that document is perfectly good, but retaining that original document at a higher quality might also be important. So again, food for thought and consideration. Because the OCR process is doing that check-in, check-out, we do not modify the original of that. So we preserve that. So if you scan a document at 1500 DPI, the output of that will be at a different DPI for the OCR scan, but that's okay. We're not losing that original content into there. The downside of it is, of course, it creates a new version or a copy of that OCR document. Of course, version control makes sure that no one confuses those versions, but we always like to point out that even though we're not modifying the original, we are creating a copy of that in order to run the OCR through. This uses common scanning formats, PDF and TIFF. Those are our two most common outputs, PDF being usually the majority of what we see as the output. The downside of it is it only works on PDF and TIFFs. So if you're dealing with a bunch of JPEGs or similar kinds of documents in the system, you may need to convert those into PDF before you bring them in. Now you can use the FileHold viewer to do that process, but we want to point out that this only works on PDF or TIFF documents. It does not work on a JPEG or a similar kind of image like that. Another pro of the server-side OCR is it works automatically. If you've been using SmartSoft Capture, you know there's a manual process involved with this. This server-side OCR just works for you. Add the document in, OCR goes to town, you get your output. The only downside of it is it only works on documents, and it doesn't work when there's a process on that document, such as workflow. So if you're dealing with records, they would need to be converted into documents before you could run them through the server-side OCR process, because we have to create a new version of that document as part of the process. And if it's a record, that will be blocked. Same thing with an archive. If you move a document into the FileHold archive, that can't be checked out, and therefore OCR won't run over top of it. And if you run the document through a workflow process, that will also be blocked. Now, these aren't huge deficits, but we always like to point this out. One of the things that I wanted to talk about quickly was the optional settings for the OCR. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here because we need to look at the OCR function first a little bit. There's not a lot that I can actually demo with it, but I can at least show you how it functions. But I want to point out there's some optional settings that we can access through the web config file. So there's information on our website about this, and the user must have access to the server in order to modify that web config file. And there's a bunch of presets into there. So for example, how often the OCR task runs. That's controlled from the task scheduler, which you can then access what those settings are through the web config file. The number of documents processed at a time. I was saying that it queues those documents, going to run 10 of them at a time. And if there's small documents or Ones that you want to run a bit faster, you might want to increase that number to see what it is. The default's 10. That's usually where we recommend we keep it, especially with larger files, to make sure nothing gets backlogged. The default language, it offers the server-side OCR function can look for English, Spanish, French, and German. The default is English. There's a DPI resolution you can set. It sets at 250. You can increase that if you want to. If you decrease it, you will definitely downgrade your results. So we usually don't recommend going lower than 250, but that's the default in there. It also means that your output documents will have an OCR processing on them. The output PDF will be at 250 DPI. So sometimes it makes sense to increase that just to be able to maintain a higher quality of image in there, but you don't get a lot of benefit from the OCR. Exclude PDFs or TIFFs. For example, if you wanted to say that we're only going to do this on PDFs, but we're not going to do it on TIFFs, you could exclude TIFFs, and both of these are included by default. You can favor accuracy over speed. So if a choice comes down to the OCR engine, is it better to take more time and be accurate, or is it better to reduce the accuracy in order to be fast? And by default, we favor speed because usually, again, we're trying to capture contents for a search index. We're not looking for a complete cataloging of all the content into there. Remember, our accuracy rating at 80% is still very high, and I would not expect to see 80% as the results. I'd expect to see more around the 95% result from a quality scanned image. But sometimes it makes sense to choose accuracy over speed, which can reduce the volume that you're able to process. In a lot of cases, that makes perfect sense. We can also choose page ranges. So for example, if you're scanning, documents that are hundreds of pages long, but you only need the content of the first couple of pages OCR'd, you can set that page limit here. Now these are global settings, so it means you'd be applying that to all documents. So food for thought, sometimes it makes a lot of sense to increase the overall speed of the process. There's a few other functions built into it, such as auto-rotate. So if somebody scanned a page upside down, it can be flipped. It can also de-askew. So if somebody, or de-skew, if somebody scanned a document at a 5-degree tilt, it'll straighten that out. That actually is a huge factor in capturing more accurate document results. So a skewed document will typically have fewer, or will have a lower accuracy rating than something that was properly skewed, which is why that's normally set to being on. Removing blank pages, though, is turned off because if we don't know if you wanted those blank pages in there, and we also don't know if you wanted the hole punches to be shown, but you can also de-hole, so it looks for the hole punches on the side of the document and removes those as well. So those are a few of the optional settings that are available, and you can get into that if you need to. But this is sort of a general look at some of the different optional settings within the system. All right. Let's jump over into my server now, and we're going to take a look at FileHold. And I've started over here. For those who don't know, this is the full administration menu. I'm logged in as my system admin account. And down here at the bottom of System Configuration Settings General, we have server-side OCR and file compression. And this is what turns this function on. So if you've purchased the optional feature, you need to come into this and turn this on. And then there's two options on this. One is to add existing documents to the queue. So basically go through the existing repository and add anything that's already there into the queue if it's a PDF or a TIFF image that does not have a text layer. So it'll do a run through that, search for those, and add those documents into the stack. We can also enforce a higher priority for newly added or checked in documents. So this is particularly valuable, especially if you just add the function. It means that a user who's scanning documents today, those documents will come through the top of the list as it's going through the thousands of documents you might already have in the repository. So it doesn't mean it goes to the end of the list. It will go to the top of the list when you newly add or check in a document. So it helps to make sure your documents get in there faster. Now, there's another aspect over here. Before I move on, I want to show that quickly, which is under the system management, and then we've got OCR and compression queue. And this is actually what we have, which shows you kind of what the status is right now. And you can see I've got some information on here. And I wanted to show this because this is not necessarily a problem in the system. This is just letting me know that there's an issue with these documents. So we can see that it's enabled. We got some errors while we were processing. 353 seems like a lot, but that's because an error might be something like this document has an active workflow. And so if the document has an active workflow, then the OCR module can't run over top of it. So it creates an error. Now, I can always re-add these documents to the queue and then see what I get. And I can clear the errors if I want to, and then re-add them into there and start fresh again. So you can periodically come into here and do this. So if you see documents and you're going, why weren't these processed? It's because it could be a document that's not allowed to. Here I've got a document that was added in and it was deleted before it had a chance to run through OCR. It's probably because I was doing some testing at the time. So again, we get some different things in here. We've got warnings, we've got errors. This will just be a report that you can pull open. So an error is not necessarily a problem. It just means that for whatever reason, there couldn't be an OCR that was run over top. So, and we can see some of my settings enabled over here. Perfect. So that's a look at the OCR queuing status. I'll also point out that we also have a compression engine. That's a separate optional feature, and that's also available. So if you're looking to compress PDFs, that can also be done to try to reduce storage space on them. Again, it depends on the kind of document as to what makes the most sense for how to apply that, or what makes the most sense to the logic for application. But that's sufficient for here. So now let's go over to my repository, and I'm just going to go over to my desktop application. You can see I'm logged in under my name, and I have a couple of sample documents here that I like to show people, which kind of gives an example of how the OCR works. And we're going to start with this one right here, which is my original document that I had, which was a FileHold brochure. So I'm going to double click this, and by double clicking it, we're going to open it up with the native application. So in this case, Adobe, and it's going to open it up with Adobe Reader, and I've got my document that was originally created with Microsoft Publisher. Now, because Microsoft Publisher has an export function, when this document was exported, it captured all of the image files for it, but it also grabbed all of the text of this document. So if I was to, let's see, where's my text selection here? Oh, there it is. So if I drag my mouse over top of this, we can see that I can select text for it. You know, if I double click the word electronic and just do Control C, and I open up my notepad, I can paste that and we've got text for it. Because I did the export through Microsoft, whatever text I had to that document is preserved as part of the text layer. So this document, we go back over now to FileHold, we can see is version 1. OCR did not need to run over top of this document because it already has a text layer to it. FileHold senses that in the PDF, and therefore it does not add it to the OCR queue. Now I took my document and I printed it. So let's go back to my versions, because here's version 1 of the document, which was given a nonsense name. That was deliberate for a demo I was doing. So we've got our document with its nonsense name, and I'm going to now open this document. This will open it up with our, again, we're going to open it up with Adobe. And now we'll notice that my mouse here does not have that same selectable that it had before, where I was able to grab text. If I go Control A, so try to select everything, there's no text on this page to be able to be grabbed. This is being treated as an image file. In a digital sense, this is a photograph. So it's a scan of that document without any content to it. So the words I'm looking for that might be contained within this cannot be found further, because this is basically an image file now. We add this document into FileHold, and then the server-side OCR process works automatically. Now, I'm not going to do that live, mainly because it just takes, it could take up to 10 minutes, and we've got other things to worry about. What I do want to show is, here's the output of that document, which is version 2 of this. And again, if you want to see the history of these, we can always go into this and we can click at the usage of the file, so we can see here's we added a document and then we downloaded it multiple times, so we did some different steps to it, by the way. That also includes today's action, so that we're still generating an audit log even though this is an older document. You go back to the version history of this, and if we check the second version of this and look at the usage of the file, here we've got the OCR of the file and checking it back in. So those two actions happening by the system process. Text layer added, no compression, because at the time I didn't have the compression enabled onto this. So when we brought this in, the document's been added, it's good to go. And here's our content for it. So now I've got the opportunity, now that we're looking at our document, to see this after the OCR has been run. So here's our original. Now let's look at this after the OCR has been run over top of it. And here's our document again, still black and white, because it's not like we can add color to it, but we're back to our text selection. And again, I can grab a word from this, I can select any of the text I want to, and when I copy that, and then we'll go back over to Notepad and we will paste, we can see the word management. So it's found our document with as many accuracies or inaccuracies as it may have come up with the OCR. When that OCR process happened, it added the text of that document to our search index. So that means now if I come over to search and I type in the word fast find, which is an optional feature of FileHold, so it's not something I expect to see in a lot of documents, I'm going to see our original electronic brochure, which is what I would expect, and I can click on highlight results, and that'll open up and show me the text of that document, which I can then scan through, and there's the word fast find, just like I would expect to see. If I click on the FileHold Scan brochure, I'm going to see the same document. Notice the formatting is all over the place. That's not unusual to see with a server-side OCR because it's looking for text as it lies on the page, whether or not that's logically laid out or not. It may also pick up noise. Like you can see some of the noise that it's picked up over here, probably because it saw an image and decided that maybe you want to try to apply an OCR layer to it. That doesn't do me any damage. That doesn't cause any negatives to the page. It just means it's creating noise in the document that I can feel free to ignore. Yes, it adds that noise to the search, but who cares? I'm not using this for the text. I'm using this for the searchability for it. The text is the mechanism. And there you can see it found the word fast find again. That, in a nutshell, is the server-side OCR function. So it's the ability to reach into documents and find the content that I might be needing in it. Now, I'm going to close that out again because there's also another way to view these documents if I wanted to, and that's to use the image viewer. So if I open up the document viewer, it's now going to load for me. It always takes a moment to load. And not only is it going to load the document, but then it's going to take a second and go into the search mode here and highlight the result for me. So let me undock this, and I'll make this full screen. And you can see where it's found the word fast find into this. So it's giving me a search capacity to find the content into the document that I may happen to be looking for. So again, we're able to use this as a second way to preview. So if I just want to see the text of the document, which by the way is where I'll find OCR, I'll only find it in the text of the document. That's one way of doing it. The other way is to use the viewer. So that's sort of the 300-foot view of this. Let me show you another reason why you might want to use a function like this. And we're gonna close the viewer. So let me close my document and then close my viewer. And I'm gonna go back over here. You'll see I've got a couple of different versions of, I grabbed a digital copy of the word Hamlet. We'll see this one over here has been converted to record. So I know it's been locked down. But if I open up the history of this, I know that version 1 of this was added as a test for OCR. That's what I called it at the time. It was a flat version of the play of Hamlet, so no text available on the document. We then ran it through an OCR process, and since then, I've done some other work to it. Now, why that's important is because I've grabbed the text of that document, which means now if I look for a word that might exist within that document, and I know my Shakespeare, so I'm going to look for the word bodkin, which I know is in there, and it finds, sure enough, there's my Hamlet document. Now this time if I do highlight results, I might have to scroll through dozens and dozens and dozens of pages in order to find that result, which isn't as useful for me. Instead, what I'm going to do is open this document up with the viewer, which I can just click on the viewer and it's going to launch that. Once it loads the document, remember, this is a document of over 150 pages, so it's going to take a little bit more time in the viewer to preview and to load. And then we can see here's our document, and then once it successfully loads it, you can see the wheel turning. It jumps me to page 67, and now again I'll undock that, and there's the word bodkin found within this document. And we also got a highlight over here where it's the only reference that it's found to that within this particular set of text. So that's excellent. It's found exactly the term I was looking for. Why I wanted to show you this is there's something that we saw just for a half second there, and I want to highlight this. I'm going to go back up to the top of the page, and I want to point out this right here. So you can see that the tragedy of Hamlet, and the tragedy is done in a very stylized font. As well, too, we're dripping from these characters into down here below. So we're actually adding content to an image. To our eyes, we see that as the tragedy of Hamlet. We understand what that is because our eyes will help us to interpret that information. To the OCR engine, however, it may not be that sophisticated. It may not understand that this could be treated more like a handwriting font. And so now if I'm going to close this out, so we're just going to go back to our mode here. We're going to close our document and then close our viewer. If I go to highlight results, take a look at what it finds for the top of it. It just gives me Hamlet. It hasn't read the H because it's read the H as more of a picture, and it hasn't found the H within that. So instead I've added Hamlet into this and the Pierce of Denmark. This is what I mean by not having 100% accuracy on the content of these. It's found errors. Now, this is excellent for finding the text within the content of it, but as soon as someone gets creative or stylish or starts to add a lot more elements to it that are visual, it can cause errors within the document's metadata, or sort of within the searchability of that document, which is why we want the metadata to be so preserved. It's really important that the metadata be preserved into this. Name of play, Hamlet, author, Shakespeare, William is great metadata to have to make sure that when I type in the word Hamlet up top here, I find Hamlet and not Amlet. Now, of course, because the word Hamlet appears multiple times in the document, I'm still going to find it. So, there's no problem there. If I click on downloading the data, go to the preview of this and start to jump through, we're going to find Hamlet in here. I think it's pretty quick. Let's see again. You can see what the OCR has done. So there's our first example of where Hamlet was found in the body of this, as opposed to just within the title page. So we're still finding what we're after. We're just finding it in a different way. Server-side OCR, this is why I'm saying does not replace metadata. Instead, it's an augmented feature for metadata. It allows you to find more terms for it. So show me all plays by William Shakespeare that contain the word bodkin, and we would find Hamlet, bodkin being from within the body of it, William Shakespeare being the author, and I'm able to find both of those points in one pass. And that's what I wanted to show you today about server-side OCR.